The Texas heat was suffocating even at 7 in the morning, and Jalen Martinez could already feel sweat beading on his forehead as he walked up the dusty path to their trailer. At 20, he had the kind of lean build and delicate features that made people do double takes, wondering if he was a boy or a girl. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, and his movements had a natural grace that he had never been able to shake, no matter how hard he tried to walk like the other guys in town. Inside the trailer, his father sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, the picture of defeated masculinity. Roberto Martinez had once been a proud construction worker, but years of injuries and drinking had worn him down to this moment, sitting across from a man who could destroy their lives with a phone call. Lucas "Tank" Rose was everything his nickname suggested. Built like a freight train with hands the size of dinner plates, he filled the small space with menace. His expensive suit looked out of place in their rundown trailer, but the gun holstered under his jacket was a clear reminder that this wasn't a social visit. $3,000, Tank said, his voice deceptively calm. Your daddy owes me $3,000 from that poker game last month. Jalen's stomach dropped. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million for all the chance they had of paying it back. His father's disability check barely covered rent and food, and Jalen's part-time job at the local diner wouldn't make a dent in that kind of debt. I don't have it, Roberto said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could win it back. But you lost even more, Tank finished. See, that's the problem with gambling, Roberto. The house always wins eventually. Please, Jalen said, stepping forward. Give us more time. I can work extra shifts, find another job. Tank looked him up and down with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up prey. You're the son? Pretty little thing, aren't you? The comment made Jalen's skin crawl, but he forced himself to stay calm. I'll find the money. Just give us a month. A month? Tank laughed, but there was no humor in it. Kid, your daddy owes me $3,000 plus interest. That's $4,000 now, and it goes up every day. What do you want from us? Jalen asked desperately. Tank was quiet for a long moment, studying Jalen with an expression that made him want a shower. Finally, he smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Jalen had ever seen. Funny you should ask. See, I got a business proposition that might work out for all of us. Tank pulled out his phone and showed them a classified ad. Lady outside town is looking for a wife for her disabled son. She's offering $5,000 to the right woman, plus room and board. Jalen stared at the ad in confusion. I don't understand. Course you don't, pretty boy. See, the way I figure it, you got the right look for this kind of thing. Soft features, long hair, moves like a dancer. Hell, put you in a dress and you'd fool anybody. The implication hit Jalen like a physical blow. You're insane. Am I? Your daddy owes me $4,000 and counting. This job pays $5,000, plus it gets you out of town until the heat dies down. Seems like a win-win to me. I'm not doing it, Jalen said firmly. I'm not pretending to be a woman to con some disabled man. Tank's smile disappeared. Then I guess your daddy's gonna have to find another way to pay me back. You know what happens to people who can't pay their debts, Roberto. Roberto flinched as if he'd been struck. Jalen had heard the stories about Tank's collection methods. People who crossed him ended up in the hospital or worse. Think about it, Tank said, standing up. You got 48 hours to decide. Either the boy puts on a dress and becomes Frida Martinez, or your daddy learns what it feels like to have his kneecaps rearranged. After Tank left, father and son sat in stunned silence. The weight of their situation pressed down on them like the oppressive Texas heat. I can't let you do this, Roberto said finally. What choice do we have? Jalen asked. If I don't do it, he'll hurt you. Probably kill you. You can't live a lie like that. Pretending to be a woman, marrying someone you don't love. It's temporary, Jalen said, though the words felt hollow. I'll figure out a way to get the money and get out before anyone gets hurt. But even as he said it, Jalen knew he was fooling himself. He had no idea what he was walking into, no plan beyond survival. All he knew was that his father's life depended on his ability to convince a stranger that he was someone he wasn't. 2 days later, Jalen stood in front of the mirror in their trailer's tiny bathroom, staring at his reflection in disbelief. The wig Tank had provided was a cascade of auburn curls that fell to his shoulders, and the makeup tutorial he'd watched on YouTube had transformed his already delicate features into something unmistakably feminine. The dress was simple but elegant, a blue summer dress that hugged his slender frame and made him look like any other young woman looking for love. Tank had thought of everything, even down to the false documents that would make Frida Martinez legally marriageable. "You look beautiful, Mijo," Roberto said from the doorway, his voice thick with guilt and sorrow. "I look like a fraud," Jalen replied, but he had to admit the transformation was convincing. If he didn't know better, he would have believed he was looking at a woman. The drive to the Waters farm took 2 hours, giving Jalen plenty of time to go over his story. Frida Martinez, 20 years old, from San Antonio, looking for a fresh start after a difficult breakup, willing to marry for companionship and security rather than passion. It felt wrong on every level, but as they pulled up to the farmhouse, Jalen reminded himself why he was doing this. His father's life hung in the balance. The house was larger than he'd expected, a 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch and well-maintained gardens. It looked like the kind of place where happy families lived, not where desperate young men came to live lies. The woman who answered the door was exactly what Jalen had expected from her voice on the phone. Bernice Waters was in her 60s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of posture that spoke of a lifetime of hard work and harder choices. "You must be Frida," she said, looking Jalen up and down with the practiced eye of someone used to sizing up livestock. "You're prettier than your picture." "Thank you, Mrs. Waters," Jalen said, grateful that his voice naturally fell into a higher register when he was nervous. Come in. "Malcolm's waiting to meet you." The inside of the house was clean and comfortable, filled with the kind of furniture that was built to last generations. Family photos lined the walls, showing happier times when Malcolm Waters had been whole and mobile. Malcolm himself was waiting in the living room, sitting in a wheelchair beside the window where the afternoon light caught the gold in his dark skin. At 25, he was a handsome man with intelligent eyes and strong shoulders that spoke of the physical strength he'd possessed before his accident. "Malcolm," Mrs. Waters said, "this is Frida Martinez, the young lady I told you about." Malcolm looked up at Jalen with an expression that was polite but guarded. "Hello, Frida. Thank you for coming." "Hello?" Jalen replied, suddenly aware of how his voice sounded, how he was standing, how everything about this situation was built on deception. But there was something in Malcolm's eyes that made him pause. Intelligence, yes, but also a deep sadness that Jalen recognized from his own mirror. This was a man who had lost more than the use of his legs. "Why don't you two get acquainted while I fix some tea?" Mrs. Waters suggested, though it sounded more like a command than a suggestion. Left alone with Malcolm, Jalen felt the weight of his deception settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. This man was looking for a wife, for companionship, for someone to share his life with. Instead, he was getting a desperate young man in a dress who was only here to save his father's life. "You don't have to look so terrified," Malcolm said gently. "I know this is an unusual situation." "I'm not terrified," Jalen lied. "Just nervous." "That's understandable. Moving to a new place, meeting new people, considering marriage to a stranger who can't walk. It's a lot." The matter-of-fact way Malcolm spoke about his disability surprised Jalen. There was no self-pity in his voice, no bitterness, just acceptance of his reality. "Tell me about yourself," Malcolm continued. "What made you answer my mother's ad?" Jalen had rehearsed this answer, but sitting across from Malcolm, the prepared lies felt even more wrong than before. "I needed a fresh start. My last relationship didn't end well." "I'm sorry to hear that. Was he abusive?" The assumption that Jalen's previous relationship had been with a man caught him off guard. He had expected questions about boyfriends, not the casual acceptance that he might have been with someone who hurt him. "Not physically," Jalen said, sticking as close to the truth as possible. "But he made some bad choices that affected both of us." Malcolm nodded as if he understood. "My mother probably told you about my accident." She said you were hurt saving someone. A little girl. Her family's wagon overturned crossing the creek during the spring floods. I managed to get her out, but the wagon rolled on top of me. Malcolm's hands moved unconsciously to his legs. Crushed 3 vertebrae. The doctors say I'll never walk again. I'm sorry, Jalen said, and meant it. It's been 2 years. I've accepted it, but my mother, she thinks having a wife will somehow fix me. Help me move forward. And you don't think so? Malcolm studied Jalen's face carefully. I think healing happens from the inside out, not the other way around. But she means well, and she's been taking care of me since the accident. If having a woman in the house makes her happy, I can live with it. The casual way Malcolm dismissed the idea of marriage as something he was doing for his mother's sake should have made Jalen feel better about the deception. Instead, it made him feel worse. This man deserved better than a fake wife and a fake marriage. Mrs. Waters returned with tea and cookies, her eyes bright with the kind of hope that made Jalen's stomach churn. She had clearly decided that Frida Martinez was the answer to her prayers. Frida, dear, tell us about your family. It's just me and my father, Jalen said. My mother died when I was young. I'm sorry to hear that. What does your father do? Construction when he can find work. He's been having some health problems lately. Mrs. Waters nodded sympathetically. It's hard when our parents get older. That's part of why I'm so eager to see Malcolm settled. I won't be around forever, and I want to know he'll be taken care of. The conversation continued for another hour, with Mrs. Waters asking increasingly personal questions about Jalen's background, his faith, his views on children and family life. Jalen answered as honestly as he could while maintaining his false identity, but every lie felt like another weight added to his conscience. Finally, Mrs. Waters stood up with the decisive air of someone who had made up her mind. Well, I think this has gone very well. Frida, if you're willing, I'd like to offer you the position. Position? Jalen asked. As Malcolm's wife, of course. The ceremony can be as simple or as elaborate as you like, but I'd prefer to have it done quickly. Tomorrow, if possible. Tomorrow. Jalen's head spun at the speed with which this was moving. He had expected courtship, getting to know each other, time to figure out how to extract himself from this situation. Instead, he was being asked to marry a man he'd met an hour ago. That's very fast, Jalen said weakly. At our age, there's no point in waiting, Mrs. Waters said briskly. You need a home, Malcolm needs a wife, and I need peace of mind. Tomorrow afternoon, Judge Phillips can perform the ceremony right here in the parlor. Jalen looked at Malcolm, hoping to see some sign that he was as uncomfortable with this rush to the altar as Jalen was. Instead, Malcolm was watching him with that same intelligent, assessing gaze. If you're having second thoughts, Malcolm said quietly, now would be the time to say so. The out was right there. Jalen could say he needed more time, that moving this fast didn't feel right, that he wanted to go home and think about it. Tank would be furious, but maybe there was another way to get the money, another solution that didn't involve lying to these people. But then he thought about his father, sitting in their trailer waiting to hear whether his son's sacrifice had saved his life. He thought about Tank's threats, about what would happen if he walked away now. No second thoughts, Jalen said. Tomorrow is fine. Mrs. Waters beamed as if she'd just won the lottery. Wonderful. I'll call Judge Phillips and make arrangements. Malcolm, why don't you show Frida to her room so she can get settled? The room Mrs. Waters had prepared was on the ground floor, clearly designed with Malcolm's wheelchair in mind. It was decorated in soft pastels with lace curtains and floral wallpaper, the kind of feminine space that made Jalen feel like an imposter. I hope you'll be comfortable here, Malcolm said from the doorway. The bathroom's just across the hall, and there's a bell on the nightstand if you need anything during the night. Thank you, Jalen said, setting down the small suitcase that contained Frida Martinez's entire wardrobe. Malcolm hesitated in the doorway. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you sure about this? Getting married tomorrow to someone you just met? Jalen wanted to tell him the truth, wanted to explain about Tank and the debt and the impossible choice he'd been forced to make. Instead, he forced a smile. Are you trying to talk me out of it? Just making sure you know what you're getting into. I'm not easy to live with. I have bad days when the pain is worse, days when I'm not fit company for anyone. I can't give you the kind of life most women want. What kind of life do you think I want? Malcolm studied his face. I honestly don't know. That's what worries me. That night, Jalen lay in the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling and wondering what he had gotten himself into. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant sound of Malcolm moving around in his room. Tomorrow, he would marry a man he barely knew under a false name and false pretenses. He would become Frida Waters, dutiful wife and caregiver, living a lie that became more complicated with every passing hour. But what choice did he have? Tank's deadline was approaching, and if Jalen didn't go through with this, his father would pay the price. The wedding ceremony the next afternoon was simple and brief. Judge Phillips, an elderly man who had clearly performed hundreds of similar ceremonies, read the traditional vows while Mrs. Waters beamed from the sidelines. Do you, Malcolm James Waters, take Frida Elena Martinez to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Malcolm said, his voice steady. And do you, Frida Elena Martinez, take Malcolm James Waters to be your lawfully wedded husband? Jalen's mouth felt dry as dust. Ido. By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. The kiss was brief and chaste, barely more than a brush of lips, but it sealed Jalen's fate. He was now legally married to Malcolm Waters under false pretenses, bound by law and deception to a man who deserved so much better. After Judge Phillips left and Mrs. Waters retired for the evening, claiming exhaustion from the excitement of the day, Jalen and Malcolm found themselves alone in the living room as husband and wife. So, Malcolm said, maneuvering his wheelchair closer to where Jalen sat on the sofa. Here we are. Here we are, Jalen agreed. Are you regretting it already? Are you? Malcolm smiled, the first genuine smile Jalen had seen from him. Ask me in a month. The next few weeks fell into a routine that was both comfortable and deeply unsettling. Jalen threw himself into the role of housewife with the same determination he had once applied to his studies. He cooked meals, cleaned the house, did laundry, and gradually took over many of the tasks that Mrs. Waters had been handling since Malcolm's accident. But it was the quiet moments that undid him. The conversations over morning coffee, the way Malcolm's face lit up when he laughed, the growing sense of companionship that developed between them. Malcolm, it turned out, was a talented craftsman who made custom-knitted hats from his wheelchair-accessible workshop in the converted garage. His work was intricate and beautiful, each hat a small work of art that he sold online to customers around the country. You're incredibly talented, Jalen said one afternoon, watching Malcolm work on a complex pattern that looked like Celtic knotwork rendered in wool. It's something to do with my hands, Malcolm said, but Jalen could hear the pride in his voice. Keeps me from going crazy sitting in this chair all day. Do you think you could teach me? Malcolm looked up from his work, surprise evident on his face. You want to learn to knit? Why not? I've got time, and it looks interesting. The lessons became a daily ritual. Every afternoon after the housework was done, Jalen would join Malcolm in the workshop, learning to cast on and cast off, to knit and purl, to read patterns and fix mistakes. You're a natural, Malcolm said one day, examining a hat Jalen had completed. Most people struggle with tension control for months, but you've got it. Jalen felt a warm glow of pride at the praise. It had been a long time since anyone had complimented his abilities, and coming from someone as skilled as Malcolm, it meant something. What should we make next? Jalen asked. Malcolm smiled. I like the sound of that. They began working on a project together, a series of hats for the local homeless shelter. Each hat would have an inspirational message embroidered on the band, words of hope and encouragement for people who had lost almost everything. As they worked side by side, Jalen found himself forgetting about the deception that had brought him here. In these moments, he wasn't Frida Martinez living a lie. He was just himself, working beside a man he was coming to care about more deeply than he had ever expected. Tell me about your dreams, Malcolm said one evening as they worked by lamplight. the rest of the house quiet around them. My dreams. Before you came here, what did you want to do with your life? It was a dangerous question, one that required careful navigation between truth and fiction. I wanted to help people, Jalen said carefully. Make a difference somehow. You are making a difference. These hats, the work we're doing together, it matters. Does it? Sometimes I feel like I'm just existing, going through the motions without really being alive. Malcolm set down his needles and looked at Jalen intently. Is that how you felt before you came here? Yes, Jalen said, surprised by the honesty of his own answer. Like I was sleepwalking through my life, waiting for something to wake me up. And now, Jalen met Malcolm's gaze, seeing warmth and understanding there that made his chest tight with unnamed emotion. Now I feel like I'm finally awake. The moment stretched between them, charged with something that made Jalen's pulse quicken. Malcolm reached out as if to touch his face, and Jalen found himself leaning into the contact, craving the connection that had been building between them for weeks. But at the last second, guilt crashed over him like a cold wave. This man was falling for a lie, for someone who didn't exist. Every moment of growing closeness was built on deception, and the longer it continued, the more it would hurt when the truth inevitably came out. I should check on dinner, Jalen said abruptly, pulling away from Malcolm's reaching hand. He saw the hurt and confusion in Malcolm's eyes, but he couldn't bring himself to explain. How could he tell this good, honest man that everything between them was based on fraud? That night, Jalen called his father from the privacy of his room, needing to hear a familiar voice. How are you doing, Mijo? Roberto asked, his voice heavy with concern and guilt. I'm fine, Papa. The people here are kind. And the man you married? Jalen closed his eyes, thinking of Malcolm's gentle hands teaching him to knit, his quiet sense of humor, the way he never let his disability define his worth. He's a good man, Papa. Better than I deserve. Don't say that. You're doing this for me, sacrificing your happiness for my mistakes. It's not all sacrifice, Jalen admitted. I care about him, more than I should. Roberto was quiet for a long moment. What are you going to do? I don't know. I can't keep lying to him forever, but I can't tell him the truth either. It would destroy him. Maybe you should come home. We'll find another way to deal with Tank. There is no other way, and we both know it. This is the only chance we have. After hanging up, Jalen lay awake staring at the ceiling and wondering how long he could maintain this double life. Every day made it harder to remember which parts of himself were real and which were performance. The crisis came 2 months after the wedding, on a day that had started like any other. Jalen was in the kitchen making lunch when he heard a familiar voice from the front porch. Well, well, well. If it isn't little Frida Martinez. Tank's voice sent ice through Jalen's veins. He had known this moment would come eventually, but he wasn't prepared for the terror that gripped him at hearing that voice in this place that had become his sanctuary. Who's at the door, honey? Malcolm called from the living room. Jalen forced his voice to remain steady. Just someone asking for directions. I'll handle it. He stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him, and came face to face with the man who had orchestrated this entire charade. Tank, he said quietly. What are you doing here? Checking on my investment, Tank said with that predatory smile. Making sure you're holding up your end of the bargain. I'm doing what you asked. I married him. I'm taking care of him. So I see. Nice little setup you got here. Husband in a wheelchair. Mother-in-law who thinks you're an angel. All that domestic bliss. Tank stepped closer, and Jalen caught the scent of alcohol on his breath. But see, here's the thing. Your daddy's debt keeps growing, and I'm starting to think maybe this arrangement isn't working out the way I hoped. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time for you to come home and we find a more direct way for you to pay off what's owed. The implication in Tank's voice made Jalen's skin crawl. We had a deal. Deals change. Your daddy gambled again last week. Lost another $2,000. Now he owes me $6,000 total, and I'm thinking maybe pretty little Frida needs to start earning her keep in other ways. No, Jalen said firmly. That wasn't part of the agreement. Tank's smile disappeared. You don't get to make demands, boy. You're in this situation because your daddy can't keep his hands off the cards. Now you either come with me right now, or I go have a conversation with your husband about exactly who he married." Jalen felt the walls closing in around him. There was no good choice here, no way out that didn't end in disaster. "Give me 1 day," he said desperately. "Let me figure out how to leave without raising suspicions." "You got 12 hours, Tank said. "After that, I start making phone calls." After Tank left, Jalen sat on the porch steps with his head in his hands, trying to figure out how to extract himself from the situation without destroying Malcolm in the process. He could run, just pack his things and disappear in the night. Leave a note explaining that he wasn't ready for marriage, that he needed time to figure out what he wanted. It would hurt Malcolm, but it would be better than the truth. But even as he considered it, Jalen knew he couldn't do it. These 2 months had changed him, had shown him what it felt like to be valued and cared for and trusted. The thought of betraying that trust, even to protect Malcolm from a worse truth, felt impossible. "Frida!" Malcolm's voice came from behind him. "Is everything all right?" Jalen turned to find Malcolm in the doorway, concern evident on his face. "I'm fine. Just getting some air. You've been sitting out here for an hour, and you look like you've seen a ghost. Just thinking about some things." Malcolm maneuvered his wheelchair onto the porch, coming to sit beside Jalen's spot on the steps. "Want to talk about it?" Jalen looked at this man who had become so important to him, this good, honest person who deserved so much better than the web of lies Jalen had woven around both their lives. "Malcolm," he said carefully, "what would you do if you found out someone you cared about had been lying to you about something important?" "That depends. What kind of lie?" "The kind that changes everything. The kind that means nothing you thought you knew about them was true." Malcolm was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I guess I'd want to know why they lied. Whether it was to hurt me or to protect me. And if it was to protect someone else entirely, then I'd probably be hurt, but I'd try to understand. People do desperate things when they're trying to protect the people they love." The kindness in Malcolm's voice made Jalen's chest ache. This man was giving him the opening to tell the truth, the chance to explain everything and maybe, possibly, find forgiveness. But before he could find the courage to speak, Mrs. Waters appeared in the doorway with that bright, determined smile that Jalen had learned to associate with her various projects and schemes. "There you two are," she said. "I was just talking to Reverend Johnson about having you renew your vows in front of the whole congregation. Wouldn't that be wonderful? A proper church wedding this time, with all our friends and neighbors there to witness your commitment." Jalen felt the blood drain from his face. A public ceremony, in front of the entire community, with his fake identity on full display for everyone to see. It was the worst possible scenario. "That's very kind," he said weakly. "But we don't need." "Nonsense," Mrs. Waters said. "Every woman deserves a proper wedding, and yours was so rushed. I've already spoken to the church ladies about decorations and the reception afterward." Jalen looked at Malcolm desperately, hoping for some sign that he would put a stop to this. Instead, Malcolm was watching him with that same assessing gaze, as if he could see straight through to Jalen's soul. "If Frida wants a church wedding," Malcolm said slowly, "then we'll have a church wedding." That night, Jalen lay in bed staring at the ceiling and knowing that his time was up. Tank's deadline was approaching. Mrs. Waters was planning a public ceremony that would expose his deception to the entire community, and Malcolm was looking at him with growing suspicion. There was only one choice left, and it was the one he had been avoiding since the day he arrived. He had to run. At 3 in the morning, Jalen packed his few belongings into the same suitcase he had arrived with. He left behind the dresses and wigs that had made Frida Martinez possible, taking only the clothes that belonged to his real self. The note he left on the kitchen table was brief and deliberately vague. "I'm sorry. I'm not ready for this kind of commitment. Please don't try to find me. Take care of yourself. F." He slipped out of the house like a thief in the night, walking the 2 miles to the main road where he caught the first bus heading toward the city. As the farmhouse disappeared behind him, Jalen told himself he was doing the right thing, the only thing that would protect everyone involved. But the ache in his chest suggested otherwise. The city was a harsh wake-up call after 2 months of small-town quiet. Jalen found a room in a boarding house that rented by the week and a job waiting tables at an all-night diner that didn't ask too many questions about his background. He cut his hair short, started binding his chest to hide what little curve the hormones of his disguise had created, and threw himself into being unmistakably, aggressively male. If anyone was looking for Frida Martinez, they wouldn't find her in this version of himself. But late at night, alone in his tiny room, Jalen couldn't stop thinking about Malcolm, about the way his hands had moved so surely over the knitting needles, teaching Jalen to create something beautiful from simple yarn, about the quiet conversations over morning coffee, the growing warmth that had developed between them despite the lies that made it all possible. He had done the right thing by leaving, Jalen told himself. He had protected Malcolm from the truth that would have destroyed him, had saved him from Tank's threats and Mrs. Waters' schemes. So why did doing the right thing feel like he had ripped his own heart out? 3 weeks after fleeing the farmhouse, Jalen was working the late shift at the diner when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Malcolm sat in his wheelchair, scanning the room with determined eyes until his gaze landed on Jalen behind the counter. Their eyes met across the crowded diner, and Jalen felt his carefully constructed defenses crumble. Malcolm had found him, despite the disguise, despite the distance, despite every effort Jalen had made to disappear. "We need to talk," Malcolm said simply when Jalen approached his table. "I can't. I'm working." "Then I'll wait." Malcolm ordered coffee and positioned himself where he could watch Jalen work, his presence a constant reminder of everything Jalen had left behind. Other customers came and went, but Malcolm remained, patient and persistent as a stone in a stream. When Jalen's shift ended at 6 in the morning, Malcolm was still there. "My room's upstairs," Jalen said quietly, knowing there was no point in running anymore. The boarding house elevator was barely large enough for Malcolm's wheelchair, and Jalen's room was so small that the chair took up most of the available floor space. But Malcolm didn't complain about the accommodations. He simply positioned himself where he could see Jalen clearly and waited. "You look different," Malcolm said finally. "This is how I really look." Jalen's voice cracked slightly on the words. "Short hair, men's clothes. This is who I actually am." "I know." The simple statement hit Jalen like a physical blow. "What do you mean, you know?" "I mean, I've known since the day you arrived that you weren't who you claimed to be. Did you really think you could fool someone who's been stuck in a wheelchair for 2 years, with nothing to do but observe people?" Jalen sank onto the narrow bed, his legs suddenly too weak to support him. "How long have you known that you were a man?" "Since the first day. Your voice, your posture, the way you moved, even in that dress and wig. You're naturally graceful, but you move like a dancer, not like a woman." "Then why didn't you say anything?" Malcolm was quiet for a long moment, his hands folded in his lap. "Because I was curious. Here was this beautiful young man, dressed as a woman, claiming to want to marry a stranger. I wanted to know why. And now you know." "Doi." "All I know is that you disappeared in the middle of the night, leaving a note that explained nothing. I know that you've been hiding in this place, working yourself to exhaustion, looking like you haven't slept or eaten properly in weeks." Jalen couldn't meet Malcolm's eyes. "I was protecting you." "From what?" The whole story came pouring out then. Tank and the debt, the threats against his father, the impossible choice between his family's safety and his own honesty. Jalen told Malcolm everything, holding nothing back, watching his understanding, and then anger crossed his face. "So you married me to save your father's life," Malcolm said when Jalen finished. "Yes." "And you left because this Tank threatened to expose you." "Yes." "And you've been hiding here, thinking that somehow protects me from getting hurt." "Yes." Malcolm was quiet for so long that Jalen began to wonder if he was going to leave without another word. Finally, he spoke. "You're an idiot." Jalen looked up in surprise. "What?" "You heard me. You're an idiot if you think I care more about your name or your gender than I do about the person you actually are. But I lied to you. About everything. You lied about your name and your body. You didn't lie about your kindness or your intelligence. or the way you light up when you're working on something that matters to you. You didn't lie about the way you take care of people, or the way you make me laugh, or the way you've made these past 2 months the happiest I've been since my accident." Malcolm moved his wheelchair closer to the bed, reaching out to take Jalen's hands in his. "I fell in love with the person who made me breakfast every morning and listened to my stories about customers who ordered impossible hats. I fell in love with the person who learned to knit so we could make something beautiful together. I fell in love with you, Jalen Martinez, not with Frida." Tears were streaming down Jalen's face now. "But your mother will adjust. She wants me to be happy, and you make me happy. And the community, the church, can mind their own business. We'll move if we have to, start over somewhere else. And Tank." Malcolm's expression hardened. "Tank is about to learn what happens when someone threatens my family." The word family hit Jalen like a lightning bolt. "Family? You're my husband, Jalen. Maybe not legally, since you married me under a false name, but in every way that matters. And nobody threatens my family." Malcolm pulled Jalen down for a kiss that was nothing like the chaste peck they had shared at their fake wedding. This kiss was real and desperate and full of 2 months of suppressed longing. When they broke apart, Jalen was shaking. "I don't know how to fix this. We'll figure it out together. But first, you're coming home with me. I can't just." "Yes, you can. Pack your things. We're leaving." The confrontation with Tank happened sooner than either of them expected. He was waiting on the farmhouse porch when Malcolm's adapted van pulled into the driveway, his presence like a dark cloud over what should have been a homecoming. Well, Tank said as Malcolm maneuvered his wheelchair up the ramp. "If it isn't the happy couple." Jalen stepped protectively in front of Malcolm's chair. "I told you I needed more time. Time's up, pretty boy. Your daddy owes me $8,000 now, and I'm done waiting." "He doesn't owe you anything," Malcolm said calmly. Tank's attention shifted to Malcolm, his expression dismissive. "This doesn't concern you, cripple." "Actually, it does. See, Jalen is my husband, which makes his family my family. And his father's debts my responsibility." Tank laughed. "You think you can just pay me off? Make this all go away?" "No," Malcolm said. "I think I can make you go away." Malcolm pulled out his phone and showed Tank the screen. It was a recording app, and it had been running since they arrived. "See, Tank, extortion is a federal crime, especially when it involves forcing someone into human trafficking, which is what you did when you forced Jalen to marry me under false pretenses." Tank's face went white. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I? I've got recordings of Jalen's testimony, documentation of the threats you made, and now I've got you on record admitting to the whole scheme." Malcolm's smile was sharp as a blade. "My lawyer is very good at his job, and he's been looking forward to meeting you." The sound of police sirens in the distance made Tank's head snap up. "You called the cops?" "I called everyone," Malcolm said. "Local police, FBI, state attorney's office. Turns out when you research someone's criminal history, you find all sorts of interesting warrants and outstanding charges." Tank looked around wildly, as if searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. The police cars were already turning into the driveway. "This isn't over," Tank snarled at Jalen. "Yes, it is," Malcolm said firmly. "It's over because I'm going to make sure you never threaten anyone I care about ever again." The arrest was swift and efficient. Tank was loaded into a police car while officers took statements from both Jalen and Malcolm. By evening, the threat that had dominated Jalen's life for months was nothing more than a bad memory and a court case. "Is it really over?" Jalen asked as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "It's over," Malcolm confirmed. "Tank's going to prison for a long time, and your father's debt died with him. I can't believe you did all that for me." "For us," Malcolm corrected. "I did it for us." Mrs. Waters chose that moment to appear in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She had taken the revelation about Jalen's true identity with surprising calm, though she had asked for time to process everything. "Dinner's ready," she said. Then, after a pause, "Both of you." It was a small gesture, but it felt like acceptance. Or at least the beginning of acceptance. That night, As they lay in bed together for the first time without lies between them, Jalen marveled at how different everything felt. "I never thought I could have this," he said quietly. "What?" "Someone who knows who I really am and loves me anyway." Malcolm pulled him closer. "You know what's funny? I was thinking the same thing. I never thought anyone would see past the wheelchair to the person I am underneath. We're quite a pair." "The best kind," Malcolm agreed. 6 months later, Jalen stood in the workshop they now shared, putting the finishing touches on a hat that would be their masterpiece. It was deep blue with silver thread worked into a pattern that looked like stars, and embroidered on the band were the words, "Found myself in someone else's eyes." "It's beautiful," Malcolm said, rolling his chair over to admire Jalen's work. "It's for you," Jalen said. "For everything you've given me." "What have I given you?" "The chance to be myself. Really, truly myself, without pretense or fear." Malcolm smiled and pulled Jalen down for a kiss. "Right back at you." Their business had grown beyond anything either of them had imagined. The story of their unusual courtship had somehow gotten out, and orders poured in from people who wanted hats made by the couple who had found love despite impossible odds. "We got 3 more orders today," Jalen said, showing Malcolm the emails. "Someone in California wants a hat that says, 'Love finds a way,' and a couple in New York wants matching hats for their anniversary. We're going to need help if this keeps up." Mrs. Waters said she might be interested in learning. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "My mother wants to learn to knit? She says she wants to contribute to the family business." The word family still sent a thrill through Jalen every time he heard it. After 20 years of feeling like he didn't belong anywhere, he had finally found his place. That evening, they sat on the porch as they did every night, watching the sun set over the Texas landscape. The routine had become precious to both of them, a daily reminder of how far they had come. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had been different?" Jalen asked. "Different how?" "If Tank hadn't forced me to marry you. If I'd just been myself from the beginning." Malcolm considered the question. "I don't think it would have mattered. I think we would have found each other eventually, one way or another." "You really believe that?" "I believe that some people are meant to be together, and we're 2 of those people. The circumstances that brought us together were complicated, but the love is simple." Jalen leaned against Malcolm's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady presence that had become the center of his world. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," Malcolm replied. "All of you, exactly as you are." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jalen reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. It had started with desperation and deception, with a young man in a dress trying to save his father's life by living a lie. But somewhere along the way, the lie had become truth. Not the false identity he had worn like a costume, but the deeper truth of who he was when he allowed himself to be loved and to love in return. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me, the real me, and for loving what you saw." Malcolm squeezed his hand. "Thank you for letting me." The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and promises. There would be challenges, certainly. There always were when 2 people decided to build a life together. But they would face those challenges as they had faced everything else. Together, with honesty and love and the unshakable knowledge that they had found something rare and precious in each other. "Ready to go inside?" Malcolm asked as the last light faded from the sky. "Ready," Jalen said, and meant it. He was ready for whatever came next, as long as Malcolm was beside him. Ready to build their business, their family, their future. Ready to be himself, completely and without reservation, for the first time in his life. As they made their way into the house, Jalen caught sight of their reflection in the window. 2 men, one in a wheelchair and one walking beside him, moving through their shared space with the easy rhythm of people who belong together. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. 1 year later, their hat business had grown beyond anything either of them had imagined possible. What had started as a small operation in Malcolm's converted garage had expanded to include a proper workshop, 3 part-time employees, and orders from across the country. The story of their unconventional love had touched something in people, and customers weren't just buying hats, they were buying hope. "We need to talk about expansion," Jalen said one morning, reviewing their latest batch of orders over coffee. "Mrs. Chun in California wants to place a standing order for 50 hats a month for her senior center. And that rehabilitation hospital in Denver is asking about bulk pricing for their patients." Malcolm looked up from the pattern he was sketching, his eyes bright with the kind of excitement that Jalen had learned to associate with his best ideas. "What if we didn't just expand the business? What if we expanded the mission?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we started a foundation? Something that provides free hats to people who need them most, hospital patients, homeless shelters, veteran centers. We could use a portion of our profits to fund it and maybe get other artisans involved." The idea hit Jalen like lightning. It was perfect, combining their love of the craft with their shared desire to help people who were struggling. "That's brilliant. We could call it, what? Second Chances Foundation?" "I like that," Malcolm said, his smile widening, "because that's what we both got, isn't it? A second chance at happiness." They spent the next several months laying the groundwork for the foundation, working with lawyers and accountants to set up the legal structure, reaching out to hospitals and shelters to understand their needs, and recruiting other craftspeople who wanted to contribute their skills to the cause. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. Jalen discovered he had a talent for project management and nonprofit administration, skills that complemented Malcolm's artistic vision and business acumen. Together, they created something that was larger than either of them could have built alone. "You know what I realized today?" Jalen said one evening as they worked side by side in their expanded workshop, surrounded by bins of yarn in every color imaginable and half-finished hats awaiting their final touches. "What's that? A year ago, I thought my life was over. I was trapped by circumstances beyond my control, living a lie to protect someone I love. I thought I'd never have the chance to be truly happy." Malcolm set down his knitting needles and turned to face Jalen fully. "And now I'm building something meaningful with the person I love most in the world. I'm helping people, creating beautiful things, living authentically for the first time in my life." Jalen paused, emotion making his voice thick. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real." "It's real," Malcolm said, reaching out to take Jalen's hand. "We're real. This love, this life we've built together, it's all real." Their first major foundation event was scheduled for the spring, a charity auction featuring one-of-a-kind hats created by artists from around the country. The proceeds would fund their first year of free hat distribution, and the guest list included everyone from local business owners to celebrities who had heard their story through social media. "Are you nervous?" Malcolm asked the morning of the event as they made final preparations at the community center they had rented for the occasion. "Terrified," Jalen admitted. "What if nobody comes? What if we don't raise enough money? What if?" Malcolm silenced his spiraling anxiety with a gentle kiss. "What if everything goes perfectly? What if we exceed our goals? What if this is the beginning of something even more amazing than we can imagine?" "You're right," Jalen said, taking a deep breath. "I'm overthinking this." "You always overthink things. It's one of your most endearing qualities." The auction was a massive success. The community center was packed with supporters, the bidding was enthusiastic, and by the end of the evening, they had raised enough money to fund their foundation for 2 full years. But more than the financial success, Jalen was moved by the stories people shared. A veteran who had received one of their hats during his stay at the VA hospital spoke about how the simple gift had reminded him that people cared about his recovery. A teenager from the local homeless shelter explained how wearing a hat with an inspirational message had given her the confidence to apply for a job. An elderly man from the nursing home talked about how knitting lessons from their volunteers had given him a sense of purpose after his wife's death. "We're not just making hats," Jalen said to Malcolm as they cleaned up after the last guests had left. "We're making connections. We're helping people remember that they matter." "That's exactly what we set out to do," Malcolm replied. "And it's exactly what you did for me, you know." "What do you mean?" "You helped me remember that I matter, that my life has value beyond what I can or can't do with my legs. You saw me as a whole person when I was having trouble seeing that myself. Jalen felt tears prick at his eyes. Even after all this time, Malcolm's ability to articulate the deep truths of their relationship still caught him off guard. You did the same for me, he said. You saw who I really was when I was still hiding behind lies and disguises. You loved me before I knew how to love myself. 6 months after the auction, they received a letter that would change their lives again. It was from a publisher in New York who had heard about their foundation and wanted to know if they would be interested in writing a book about their experiences. A book? Jalen stared at the letter in disbelief. They want us to write a book? About our story, about the foundation, about the power of second chances. Malcolm read from the letter. They think it could inspire other people who are facing difficult circumstances. But I'm not a writer. Neither of us are writers. We're storytellers, Malcolm said. Every hat we make tells a story. Every person we help has a story. Maybe it's time to tell our story too. The process of writing the book was both more difficult and more rewarding than either of them had expected. It meant revisiting painful memories, Jalen's desperate deception, Malcolm's struggles with his disability, the months of uncertainty before they found their way to each other. But it also meant celebrating how far they had come and hopefully offering hope to others in similar situations. How do we end it? Jalen asked one evening as they worked on the final chapter. How do we wrap up a story that's still being written? We don't end it, Malcolm said. We just pause it. We tell people where we are now and invite them to imagine where we might go next. The book, titled Knitted Together, A Story of Love, Deception, and Second Chances, was published 18 months later. It became a surprise bestseller, resonating with readers who were drawn to its message about the power of authenticity and unconditional love. The success of the book led to speaking engagements, where Jalen and Malcolm would travel to conferences and events to share their story with audiences ranging from LGBTQ+ youth groups to disability rights organizations to business conferences focused on social entrepreneurship. I never thought I'd be comfortable speaking in public, Jalen confessed after their first major conference presentation. But when I see how our story affects people, how it gives them hope or courage or just the feeling that they're not alone, it makes it worth it. You're a natural, Malcolm said. You have a gift for making people feel seen and understood. We both do. That's why this works. Their relationship had evolved and deepened over the years, shaped by shared challenges and celebrated successes. They had learned to navigate the complexities of running a business together, the pressures of minor celebrity, and the ongoing process of building a life that honored both of their authentic selves. Do you ever miss the simplicity of those early days? Malcolm asked one evening as they sat on their porch, now expanded to accommodate Malcolm's wheelchair and furnished with comfortable seating for the friends and visitors who had become regular parts of their lives. You mean when we were just two people learning to knit together in a garage workshop? Jalen considered the question. Sometimes. But then I think about all the people we've helped, all the lives we've touched, all the love we've spread through our work, and I realize I wouldn't trade this for anything. Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts. The hard parts are what taught us who we really are and what we're capable of together. Malcolm nodded, understanding passing between them in the wordless communication they had developed over years of partnership. I love you, Jalen Martinez Waters. Jalen had legally changed his name after their second, authentic wedding ceremony, a small affair with close friends and family who knew and accepted their complete story. Hearing Malcolm say his full name, with both their surnames hyphenated together, still sent a thrill through him. I love you too, Malcolm Martinez Waters. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their newest employee, a young man named David who reminded Jalen strongly of himself at 20. Lost, talented, and desperately in need of a place where he could be himself without judgment. Sorry to interrupt, David said, climbing the porch steps with a bag of yarn samples. But the supplier's samples came in, and I wanted to get your approval on the colors for the Veterans Hospital order. No problem, Malcolm said, gesturing for David to join them. Show us what you've got. As David spread out skeins of yarn in various shades of blue and gray, Jalen watched Malcolm's face light up with the enthusiasm he brought to every new project. After all these years, Malcolm's passion for his craft hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger as he found new ways to use his skills to help others. "These blues are perfect," Malcolm said, holding up a skein that was the color of a clear winter sky. "And this gray will make beautiful accent work. David, you have excellent color sense." David's face flushed with pride at the compliment. He had been with them for 6 months now, learning not just the technical aspects of knitting but also the philosophy that guided their work, that every stitch was an act of care, every hat a small gesture of love sent out into the world. "I was thinking," David said hesitantly, "maybe we could add some kind of texture pattern to these? Something that would be interesting to touch for people who might be dealing with anxiety or stress." "That's a brilliant idea," Jalen said immediately. "Malcolm, what do you think? A subtle cable pattern that would give the fabric some dimensional texture." "Perfect," Malcolm agreed. "David, why don't you work up a sample? If it works out the way I think it will, we might use it for all our hospital orders." After David left, buoyed by the validation of his idea, Jalen and Malcolm remained on the porch as the evening light faded around them. "He reminds me of you at that age," Malcolm said quietly. "Lost and pretending to be someone I wasn't? Talented and underestimating his own worth," Malcolm corrected. "You've been good for him, you know, giving him a chance, believing in his abilities. We've been good for him, just like we've been good for each other." "True." Malcolm paused, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "What if we opened a second location? Maybe somewhere urban where we could reach different populations. And what if we made it more than just a production facility? What if we created a community space where people could come to learn, to create, to connect with others?" Jalen felt the familiar spark of excitement that Malcolm's best ideas always ignited in him. Like a community center focused on fiber arts and social connection? Exactly. We could offer classes, host support groups, provide a safe space for people who might be isolated or struggling. And we could still produce hats for the foundation, but we'd also be creating community. "I love it," Jalen said immediately. "Where were you thinking?" "Actually, I was thinking about Houston. It's close enough that we could oversee the setup, but far enough away to serve a completely different population. And the city has a lot of resources for the kind of partnerships we'd want to develop." They spent the next hour brainstorming possibilities, their conversation flowing with the easy collaboration that had characterized their best work together. By the time they went inside, they had outlined a rough plan for what they were already thinking of as the Houston Community Fiber Arts Center. The next morning brought a call that would test their newly expanded vision in ways they hadn't anticipated. "Mr. Martinez Waters?" The voice on the phone was professional but warm. "This is Dr. Sarah Chun from the Houston Medical Center. I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but we have a situation here that I think might interest you." "Of course," Jalen said, switching the phone to speaker so Malcolm could hear. "How can we help?" "We have a patient, a young man who was in a serious accident 6 months ago. He's paralyzed from the waist down, and he's been struggling with depression and anger about his situation. He was an artist before the accident, and he's convinced he'll never be able to create anything meaningful again." Jalen and Malcolm exchanged glances, both thinking of Malcolm's own journey from despair to purpose after his accident. "His physical therapist mentioned your foundation and suggested that learning a new form of art might help with his recovery process. I was wondering if you might consider working with him directly, maybe teaching him some basic techniques to get him started." "We'd be happy to help," Malcolm said immediately. "When would you like us to come? Would this weekend be too soon? I know it's a big ask, but Marcus, that's our patient, he's at a critical point in his recovery. We think that connecting with someone who understands what he's going through might make all the difference." That Saturday, Jalen and Malcolm made the drive to Houston with a bag full of yarn samples, basic knitting supplies, and years of experience in the transformative power of creating something beautiful with your hands. Marcus Williams was 23 years old, with the kind of athletic build that spoke of a life spent in motion before his accident. He sat in his hospital bed with his arms crossed, his expression closed off and hostile. "I don't want to learn to knit," he said before they had even introduced themselves. I'm not some old lady looking for a hobby. Neither was I, Malcolm said calmly, maneuvering his wheelchair closer to Marcus's bed. I was a 25-year-old man who thought his life was over because he couldn't walk anymore. Something in Malcolm's tone made Marcus look at him more carefully, taking in the wheelchair and the confident way Malcolm moved in it. What happened to you? Marcus asked reluctantly. Wagon accident. Crushed 3 vertebrae trying to save a little girl from a flash flood. Malcolm's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jalen could hear the echo of old pain beneath the calm surface. Doctors said I'd never walk again. They were right. So how are you okay with it? I'm not okay with it, Malcolm said honestly. I'll never be okay with it. But I learned to build a life that was worth living anyway. And part of that life is creating things that matter, things that help other people. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this. What kind of things? That was when Jalen stepped forward, pulling out his phone to show Marcus photos of some of their foundation's work. Hats for cancer patients, scarves for homeless individuals, blankets for premature babies in the NICU. Every piece we make carries a message, Jalen explained. Hope, courage, love, perseverance. When someone receives one of our hats, they're not just getting protection from the cold. They're getting a reminder that someone cares about them, that they're not alone. And you think knitting can do all that? Marcus's skepticism was clear, but there was also curiosity in his voice. I think creating something with your own hands, especially something that's meant to comfort or help another person, can change how you see yourself and your place in the world, Malcolm said. It did for me. What were you before? Marcus asked. Before the accident, I mean. I was angry, Malcolm said simply. Angry at the world, angry at my circumstances, angry at everyone who could do things I couldn't do anymore. The anger was eating me alive. And knitting fixed that? Meeting Jalen fixed that, Malcolm said, reaching out to take Jalen's hand. But knitting gave me a way to channel my energy into something positive, something that made a difference. Marcus looked between them, clearly seeing the deep connection that existed between the two men. You're together. Married, Jalen confirmed. Though it's a long story how we got there. I'd like to hear it sometime, Marcus said. And for the first time since they'd arrived, he sounded genuinely interested in something. They spent the next 2 hours with Marcus, showing him basic knitting techniques and talking about their journey from individual struggles to shared purpose. By the time they left, Marcus had completed several rows of a simple scarf and had agreed to continue practicing on his own. Think he'll stick with it? Jalen asked as they drove home. I think he'll try, Malcolm said. And sometimes trying is enough to get started. Over the next several months, they made regular trips to Houston to work with Marcus and other patients in the rehabilitation program. What started as individual instruction sessions gradually evolved into group classes, with patients teaching each other and supporting each other's progress. You realize what we've accidentally created here? Dr. Chun said during one of their visits. You've created exactly the kind of community support system that we know aids in recovery, but that's so hard to foster in a medical setting. What do you mean? Jalen asked. I mean you've given these patients a shared purpose, a way to help each other and to help others outside this hospital. They're not just working on their own recovery anymore. They're contributing to something bigger than themselves. It was true. The patients had begun working together on special projects, creating items for other departments in the hospital, for local shelters, for disaster relief efforts. The knitting circle had become a support group, a social network, and a source of meaning and purpose. This is what we want to replicate in the community center, Malcolm said to Jalen on the drive home. This sense of shared purpose, this connection between creating and healing. We're going to need a bigger space than we originally planned, Jalen said, and more staff, and probably partnerships with social service organizations and healthcare providers. Are you worried about taking on something this big? Jalen considered the question seriously. 5 years ago, he had been a desperate young man willing to live a lie to save his father's life. Now he was contemplating launching an ambitious community program that could affect hundreds of lives. I'm excited, he said finally. nervous but excited. I think we're ready for this. The Houston Community Fiber Arts Center opened 18 months later in a converted warehouse space that included workshop areas, a retail section featuring local artisans' work, a cafe that employed individuals recovering from various challenges, and meeting rooms for support groups and classes. The opening day exceeded all their expectations. Hundreds of people toured the facility, signed up for classes, and learned about the various programs they offered. Local media covered the story, focusing on the innovative approach to community building and social support. "Look at what we've built," Malcolm said to Jalen as they stood in the main workshop area, watching dozens of people bent over various projects, talking and laughing and creating together. "Look at what we've all built," Jalen corrected, gesturing to include the staff members, volunteers, and participants who had become integral parts of their extended community. The success of the Houston Center led to inquiries from other cities, and before long, Jalen and Malcolm found themselves consulting on similar projects in Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio. Their model of combining fiber arts with community support and social service was being studied by researchers and replicated by other organizations. "Sometimes I can't believe this started with us trying to figure out how to make a few hats for homeless people," Jalen said one evening as they reviewed expansion proposals and partnership requests. "It started with you needing to save your father's life," Malcolm pointed out. "Everything else grew from there. Do you think he'd be proud? My father, if he could see what came from that terrible situation with Tank." Malcolm reached across their kitchen table to take Jalen's hand. "I think he'd be amazed. And I think he'd be proud not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become." Roberto Martinez had passed away 2 years earlier, finally succumbing to the health problems that had plagued him for years. But he had lived long enough to see his son find happiness and purpose, to walk Jalen down the aisle at their second wedding, and to hold his first grandchild, the little girl that Jalen and Malcolm had adopted from the foster care system. "I wish he could have seen Sophia take her first steps," Jalen said, thinking of their daughter, now 3 years old and the light of both their lives. "He knew she would," Malcolm said. "He knew she'd grow up surrounded by love and creativity and community. That's what mattered to him." Sophia had been 18 months old when she came to them, a little girl whose mother had struggled with addiction and whose father was unknown. The adoption process had been long and sometimes difficult, but from the moment she had toddled into their workshop and immediately begun sorting yarn by color, she had belonged with them. "Daddy, Papa, look what I made." Sophia's voice carried from the living room, where she had been working on her own, knitting project with large needles and thick yarn. They found her on the floor surrounded by a tangle of colorful yarn that might generously be called a scarf, her face beaming with pride. "It's beautiful, little love," Malcolm said, lifting her onto his lap. "Tell us about it." "It's for Mrs. Chun at the hospital," Sophia announced, "because she said her cat died and I want her to feel better." Jalen felt his heart clench with love and pride. At 3 years old, Sophia had already internalized the core philosophy that guided their work, that creating something with your hands for someone else was an act of love and healing. "That's very thoughtful of you," Jalen said. "Should we help you finish it so it's ready to give to her?" "Yes. And can we make it have words on it like the grown-up hats?" "What words would you like it to say?" Malcolm asked. Sophia considered this seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Love makes everything better." "Perfect," Jalen said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's exactly what it should say." As they worked together to complete Sophia's project, adding a simple embroidered message to her lumpy but enthusiastic scarf, Jalen reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had started as a desperate deception had grown into a love story, which had grown into a business, which had grown into a movement, which had grown into a family. "What are you thinking about?" Malcolm asked, noticing Jalen's contemplative mood. "Just how everything connects," Jalen said. "How one choice, even a choice made in desperation, can ripple out in ways we never expect." "Good ripples or bad ripples?" "The best ripples," Jalen said, looking around at their home, their family, their life. "The kind that spread love and hope and healing to places we never dreamed we could reach." That night, After Sophia was asleep and they had finished their evening routine, Jalen and Malcolm sat in their workshop sorting through the day's mail. Among the usual business correspondence and foundation documents was a letter that made them both pause. It was from Marcus Williams, the young man they had first met in the Houston hospital 4 years earlier. He was writing to tell them that he had just opened his own adaptive art studio, specifically designed to serve individuals with disabilities who wanted to explore their creativity. "I wanted you to know," the letter read, "that the work you do saved my life, not just by teaching me to knit, but by showing me that my value as a person wasn't tied to what my body could or couldn't do. You taught me that I could still create, still contribute, still make a difference in the world. I'm passing that lesson on to others now, and I hope you know that every person I help is a testament to the ripple effects of your kindness." "He's created his own center," Malcolm said, his voice warm with pride. "Look at this photo. He's got 15 students in his first class." "Another ripple," Jalen said softly. "Another life changed, and now he's changing other lives." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about the interconnectedness of human experience and the way that healing and hope could spread from person to person like a virus of kindness. "I have something to tell you," Malcolm said eventually, his tone carrying a note of excitement that made Jalen look up from the thank you cards he was sorting. "What's that?" "I got a call today from someone at the State Department. They want to know if we'd be interested in consulting on an international project." "International?" "Refugee resettlement programs. They're looking for innovative approaches to helping displaced families integrate into their new communities. And someone mentioned our community center model." Jalen set down the cards completely, giving Malcolm his full attention. "They want us to work with refugees? They want us to pilot a program that would teach traditional fiber arts from refugees' home countries, while also helping them learn skills that could lead to employment in their new communities. Cultural preservation and economic empowerment rolled into one. The idea was breathtaking in its scope and potential impact. Jalen could already envision workshops where Syrian refugees taught traditional embroidery while learning English, where Guatemalan families shared their weaving techniques while building connections with their new neighbors. "That would be incredible," Jalen said, "and challenging, and probably the most important work we've ever done. So you're interested?" "I'm more than interested. I'm inspired." Jalen reached across the table to take Malcolm's hands. "5 years ago, I thought my biggest challenge was learning to knit well enough to help you with your business. Now we're talking about potentially impacting refugee communities around the world. Are you ready for something that big?" Jalen looked around their workshop, at the bins of yarn and the finished hats waiting to be shipped to hospitals and shelters, at the photos on the walls showing all the people whose lives had been touched by their work. "I'm ready," he said. "We're ready. We've been preparing for this our whole lives. We just didn't know it. The international project would take months to develop and launch, but the possibility of it energized both of them in ways they hadn't expected. They began researching refugee resettlement challenges, connecting with international aid organizations, and dreaming about programs that could help displaced families rebuild their lives while preserving their cultural heritage. "You know what I love most about this idea?" Jalen said one evening as they worked side by side on prototypes for refugee training materials. "What's that?" "It brings us full circle. When I first came to you, I was essentially a refugee myself, displaced from my own life, forced to hide who I really was, desperately needing someone to see my value and help me find my place in the world." Malcolm looked up from the pattern he was sketching, understanding dawning in his eyes. "And now we can offer that same kind of sanctuary to others." "Exactly. We can create spaces where people can be authentically themselves while learning skills that will help them build new lives. We can show them that their traditional knowledge and cultural practices are valuable assets, not obstacles to overcome. We can help them knit themselves into their new communities," Malcolm said, smiling at the metaphor. Literally and figuratively. As they continued planning and dreaming, Jalen felt a deep sense of completion settling over him. Not the completion of an ending, but the completion of a circle, a return to fundamental truths about human connection and the power of creating something beautiful together. "I love you," he said to Malcolm, the words carrying years of shared struggle and triumph, of individual growth and partnership, of building something meaningful from the scattered threads of two broken lives. "I love you too," Malcolm replied. "And I love the life we've built together. And I love that we're still building it, still discovering new ways to spread hope and healing in the world." Sophia's voice drifted from her bedroom, calling out in her sleep about yarn colors and hugs and making things for people she loved. Even in her dreams, she was creating, caring, connecting, a living embodiment of the values that had guided her parents from their first tentative stitches together. "She's going to change the world," Jalen said softly. "She already is," Malcolm replied, "just like her parents did." As they turned off the workshop lights and made their way to bed, Jalen reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate young man in a dress to a successful entrepreneur and social innovator, from a bitter man in a wheelchair to a community leader and healer, they had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to spread love and hope through the simple act of creating something beautiful with their hands. But tonight, they were content to be exactly where they were, surrounded by the evidence of lives well lived and love well shared. "Thank you," Jalen whispered into the darkness as they settled into bed. "For what? For seeing me, for loving me, for building this incredible life with me. Thank you for letting me," Malcolm whispered back. "Thank you for choosing to stay, for choosing to love me back, for choosing to build something beautiful from what could have been just another sad story. Always," Jalen promised, "for always and always." And in the quiet of their shared bedroom, surrounded by the peace of their chosen family and the satisfaction of meaningful work, they slept the deep sleep of people who had found their purpose and their place in the world, secure in the knowledge that their love would continue to create ripples of healing for years to come.